Okay.
Good afternoon, everyone. This is the 16th webinar from Your Big Pick. And every couple of weeks, we pick on a topic that is something I care deeply about, which is engagement, but we try and apply it in a different way. And we'll be going through a bit of related experience around the topic today. And what we'll be doing is then going into a bit of a practical exercise to follow on. So if you are watching the recording, maybe just pause it and get a hold of the webinar prop so you can just follow along when we get into the exercise. Just a little bit about Zoom, if you're not familiar. I think everybody pretty much is. It's a great bit of software. You've got a choice of a speaker view and a gallery view in the top right. And you've also got, down in the bottom, I've noticed a new bit of functionality, which I'm dying to play with, which is reactions. I've not seen that before. I think they've managed new bit of kit provided by Zoom. So if you want to react away, hopefully positive. In fact, you can only wave and give me the thumbs up, which is great for me. You can't give me the thumbs down or do the other sign. So
how do we do that, Martin?
Down at the bottom on mine. So if I click thumbs up, that might appear somewhere. There we are. Just at the bottom.
I can't see that.
Okay, I'll leave you to find that, Chris, in a bit of like learner finding, do a bit of Google search. Oh, look, everyone's got stuff up. And Tracy's just joining in as well. So we'll get into it. What we're looking at here is a challenge. So what I hope in the prep that we've done, you've maybe thought of a challenge that's been something that you've experienced or been party to in the recent history of your work background. Now I'm going to use an example, and we're going to go through. I'll just put Tracy on mute for that. And what we'll go through, just before we get into that, I just want to play, if you've all got a challenge, have you all got a challenge in mind? Has everyone got a thought? Yes, so let's have a quick game. If you've been on one of my webinars before, you know that I play a little game at the beginning, which I play Zip Zap Zop. Richard's face will be a picture because it was quite funny when it happened. Right. And I've also noticed we've got two Chris's. So I'm not going to get caught out by that before again. So what I'm going to say is I'm going to say zip, and then I'm going to state what my challenge is, and then I'm going to send it off to someone by giving a name. That person is then going to say zap, and then they're going to give their challenge, and they're going to zop somebody else. So I'm going to zip staff retention in marketing to Chris Gadd.
And I have to tell you what my challenge is. I haven't sort of got a challenge. I've got an example of something that happened. That's just I suppose it's in a company that's a manufacturing company. And I'm going to zip zap. Paul?
Thank you. Mine is around re-energizing people. On a project where the life cycle of the project is, I guess, really it's somewhere between maturity and decline, and we need to kick that project off again, but the energy is not there.
Very nice, very nice.
Oh, so I'm going to zop Lisa in the nicest possible way.
Hi, I'm a bit late to this, so I'm kind of I must admit I'm not very well prepared. But in terms of challenges, I think similar to yours is probably where there's changes in staff midway through, and how maybe leadership can work with them on that.
Okay, very good. Who are you zopping, Lisa?
Oh, sorry, I shall zop Chris Scott.
Hello. So the challenge I thought of was one that I faced in Welcome Break last year or year before, which was launching brand new career paths across the management population.
Wow, that is a biggie.
And what am I doing? Am I zopping? Am I zapping?
Zipping.
Zipping.
I will zip Richard.
So I picked out a couple of challenges, but the one that I think most working on at the moment is an organisation who have implemented a system. They have talked up the system for a number of years now, probably 5 years, as being the thing that has made them so good at everything they do. And it's slowly dawning on them that the system doesn't really work anything like they think it does. And we're trying to work out how we actually get the benefits that they could get from the system if it did work.
That's lovely. Thank you, Richard. And I love that introduction, that welcome into the room from Tracy there, wandering around on her iPhone. It's made me a little bit dizzy. But Tracy, we were just talking about a challenge that you might have, that you might use as an example for this webinar. If you're prepared with one of them, that would be great.
Yeah, well, thank you for waiting for me, and I apologise for that. First challenge was actually getting onto this Zoom, so hi everybody. My challenge, I've just set up my own business actually, so I think my challenge is about being brave and getting out there and marketing what it is that I've got. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does actually. And my challenge was around a client I'd worked with who had a problem around staff retention in marketing. So there's a bit of a marketing thing going on to that. If you've got the prop handy, just as I go into this little spiel, Tracy, it'll be mean when we get on to the practical, you can follow along. There's the little thing that Paul was holding up there. It's just a piece of paper. Did you get it printed out?
No.
That's fine. Just have a piece of paper handy and you can follow along. And I'll be showing something on screen. But just into a bit of related experience, and it was really interesting. I'd made my notes for this after a chat I'd had with Paul a couple of weeks ago. And then I was talking to Chris earlier, Chris Gadd, and Chris sent me a lovely page, fantastic book, How Not to Waste Your Money on Training, which is always on my shelf here. And I just picked off, and she sent me this graphic. And it was almost remarkable to a point how Chris Gadd and I have been chatting, and we do that because we've got shared values, I think, and what happens is the approach that results from those beliefs is often in line. So I almost had to say to Chris, actually, that's weirdly exactly like my notes. Now, I have a particular way of doing it with Big Picture that I'm going to take you through. But my 3 points of related advice or insights that I would throw in there just as a thought, and keep your challenge in mind when I'm going through these. One is about definition. And definition at a fundamental level against and aligned to the purpose of the business. So whatever the challenge is, stripping it right back to basics and actually wondering and thinking and reminding ourselves what the purpose of the business is. And that, for me, is going to help contextualize and consider and frame the problem. And it's not only definition in terms of purpose, it's definition in terms of the key elements of the business. And when I talk about key elements, I think these are transferable skills, but in big picture terms, we use symbols to represent key elements of the business. And I've just noticed over my shoulder here, I didn't mean this to happen, I've got a beautiful big symbol here, which in big picture terms is our measure symbol. And that's going to be one of the keys. It's one of the things you've got on your prop that you've cut out, Paul, if you would just want to hold it up. I saw you playing around with it there. So you've got you, beautiful. And you've got your measure symbol here, and over here we've got technology. So we've got different elements of the business, and without getting too much into big picture just yet, it's about definition in the form of how that challenge relates to key elements in the business, not only the symbols that I mentioned, but also in which area of the business. And if you believe in the kind of systems thinking and the fact that everything is connected together as I do, then it helps enormously to have an engaging conversation with others and colleagues, assuming you can't fix that yourself. So you have to be able to have then a conversation with your team around it. So that kind of connection you can make with different elements of the business, including measures, including the different business areas, is going to be enormously helpful, because it's going to lead to a positive conversation under the purpose and the why of what the business is there for. And we'll go through a little practical for that in a second, and I will pause for some input on that. My third bit of related experience after that level of definition is around an action plan. And I purposefully, in the title for this webinar, suggested it was about action. Actions leading to outcomes. So it's all well and good defining it and spotting an opportunity to do something, but actually how are you going to turn that into something that's an outcome. And I use the SMART mnemonic. Probably everybody in here will have probably heard of, but I find it incredibly useful, and somebody watching this may not be familiar with SMART, which is your specific, your measurable, there's that measure word, achievable, realistic, and time-bound, if I remember rightly. And I find that enormously useful to create an action by defining something in that way. It links through. Now, I will pause at that point. I was going to say, if you have got a little point to make, because there's 6 to 7 of us, put it down in the chat box. But I'm just going to take a visual, anyone with a hand up or point to make, or I'll flow through into the practical. If anyone wants to indicate they want to jump in. Chris, I referred to your book. Give me a point on your book, how that translates.
So you were just mentioning SMART, and I've always struggled with using that mnemonic, because how smart is the objective? How measurable is it? How achievable is it? And some of you may have come across Robert Major's PCS framework for setting objectives, and I find that much more useful. If you look it up, Robert Major, M-A-G-E-R, and it's PCS. P stands for performance, C stands for conditions, and S stands for standard. And I've found that framework has helped me to write very specific SMART objectives, because before then I used to struggle writing them. So it's a really, really good framework.
Sounds like a useful insight and a build on. Would you post in the background, Chris, chat a little link to that just whilst I'm going on something else?
Yes, I will, yeah.
I'd like to look up. Anybody else want to chip in on the that kind of definition, or the kind of SMART? Probably more on the definition side. The role of purpose, let's pick on that. How important is the role of purpose and why of a company in considering the challenge? Has anyone got kind of reference to that before we go into the practical? Okay, I'll go into the practical. That's fine. If anyone's got a point at anything they do want to say, because I like it to be a two-way dialogue, just post me a little pointer in the chat room. So I'd like you to take your prop, and I'd like you to take a challenge. I'm going to do something in this webinar that I've not actually done on another webinar, and that is I'm going to follow along using our digital kit, which I'm going to show you here. I'm just going to go to the right tab. I've just actually closed it down. So what I'm going to do is just bring this up. I did prepare this, and then I went off and did something else, so sorry about that. Just bear with me. Just whilst you're doing that, just on your prop at the top, if you would, just on the top, just write the purpose of the business that you're thinking about when it comes to the challenge that you've got. So just at the top of your prop, and Tracy, for you, just at the top of your page, if you would, just write for me the purpose, because we, in big picture terms, we always put the purpose at the top of the page. So if you would just do that for me, and I'll just bring up my board and I'll share it with you. There we are. So I'm using a digital version. It's our digital kit for big picture, so you should be able to see that. I've shared the board with you, and I'm going to play around with that whilst you follow along on your props. If I zoom out now, what you should see here, you've got the same view as I have. You should be able to translate it. It's a simplified version on the prop that you've got, but you should be able to translate it. And I've even gathered the symbols are here over the left hand side. So I'm going to use the same symbols as you. And for the example that I'm using, the purpose of the business is to help our customers make best use of their leisure time. So you can maybe imagine, without mentioning any specific names, this is a company, a business in the kind of leisure entertainment sector. And they've chosen a purpose where it's all about helping make use of the leisure time. So nothing too specific, just giving people an experience like you might do if you went to the cinema, if you went to a restaurant, etc. So different purposes, different missions. So that gives us an example. And what that allows me to do in context is bring my challenge on and think about, where does that challenge sit in the business? Now, in big picture terms, you might start by thinking about this yourself, but what I would encourage you to do in this scenario is imagine a conversation that you might be having with colleagues. Big picture is all about the engagement element, and for me that means at least one other person is part of that conversation. Now I've brought on my challenge symbol here, and the example that I'm using for me is the retention of staff, as I said. So just bring that challenge symbol and place it on your prop where you think it's applicable to the business. So it's staff, but for me it's specifically retention of staff in the marketing space. I'm just going to move that up and put it in the marketing space. Okay, just lost it. So just let me come out again and come back in. So who's been, have you been able to place that somewhere on your prop? Has anyone been able to do that? Have you put it in marketing, in operations, or in customer care? I'm going to put mine in marketing. So take your...
The example I was thinking of.
Yeah.
So the example I was thinking of, it was to do with, there were more complaints for this particular customer at the call centre. That's where the actual challenge was.
And where would that be on your little template, on your board, Chris? Maybe?
Customer care, I would say. There, I've called it, yeah.
So I know I'm using, in fact, I'll bring on a different challenge symbol just to represent other people's. Anybody, so Chris would be there, and I could actually position this. Lisa, where would your challenge sit within the business that you're thinking about?
For me, it's about trying to maintain business as usual when there's been staff changes, so that it's more to do with the operations side of it.
Yeah.
So I've put mine under operations, because what I want to do is to be able to have staff leave, new staff come in, and for it not to affect the day-to-day running of the business.
Yeah, and when you were talking there, I don't know if you noticed, Lisa, it's almost instinctive, and Chris Scott will have seen this a lot yesterday when we were running through big picture in the room. It becomes a connection that I make when you're talking, so I almost preempted where you were going to put that challenge symbol, because it's actually, if you give people a simple and reasonable framework, it does become apparent and something you can do. That I understood, I was listening intently to what you said, and I'd almost placed challenge within operations before you said it, because I think you used the term business as usual, and I know business as usual could mean any part of the business, but I think you were alluding to the fact it was operations, which you then went on to confirm. And the idea is there that because I prompted you and you said it and then I moved the symbol, if we were using the same board, whether we were using digitally or using different kits, then actually we would be having a better and more engaging conversation where we understood what each other was saying. And I want to move it on, so we'll crack on. We've got this team symbol, and I'm just going to move that challenge symbol now, because I'm going to go back to using my example here on the left-hand side, because my problem is remembering I've defined the purpose of the business to be about customers' use of leisure time. I've got the retention of staff in marketing, and I'm now thinking about which team does that affect. And I know this is a simple example because we're stuck for time, but I'm going to bring on this team, and actually it'll be obviously the marketing team it might affect. And clearly we're looking at this yellow line, which is the customer journey. Now the customer comes along here, and actually I'm thinking by association, the marketing team who have the challenge, that might be impacting the customer in some way, because maybe you've got a turnover of staff, you're not getting them inducted or trained up quick enough, and actually your challenge there is starting to have a negative effect on the customer. And that's the first kind of connection we've made. So I've made a connection from challenge to team to customer, but I've done it in a visual way, which would lead to an engaging and wholesome conversation with my colleagues. And I'm wondering if we could use, by maybe holding it up or just talking about, and maybe I can follow along, whether anybody else would share the challenge that they have had, where they've placed it within the business, and maybe a connection they've made with team or customer. Would anybody be willing to share that?
Yeah, sure. So I have put my challenge in operations because it's around project and energy. but I've actually put my team symbol in customer care.
Yeah.
Because as internal customers of each other, we don't care enough about those relationships. I really believe that.
Wow. So there's a pattern in itself. And have you just seen that once, Paul, as an example, or is that a bit of a recurring theme with the kind of lens that you provide?
Yeah, no, when I think over the last sort of few months, it's becoming evident there's that lack of, and I'm talking, as I say, again, I'll just confirm it is the internal customer. This client does not do well, or this project doesn't do well with internal customers. So,
Yeah.
and as I keep saying, we're not going to look after the external customer very well if we can't look after each other. So anyway,
Right.
so yeah.
Yeah, no, that's great. So I've just moved a little pattern. So as Paul's talking there, if he and I were in the same room or in session using the digital kit or any kind of kit, what's interesting, and I know you've been awfully kind of kind to me because we all want this to work, but I see this behavior when I work with teams, and you could and should too, which is if you give them a reasonable framework and the dots to join, they will quite happily go along because they want to get the message across more clearly. And the way they do that is they think they can direct their thoughts and their internal thinking through an external tool, which enables me to understand Paul by playing back to him what I'm understanding. And I think that's a form of engagement that's really powerful, that doesn't require any education or background in terms of board level, MBA, business analysis skills to do that. It's all very natural. So I'll just move those off. I'd love to go to a different example, but I've not got time to do that. What I'd like to do is focus on this measure. Now, we said not only would we look at the purpose at the top of the screen, and we would define the challenge around the team it affects, the area of the business and the customer. These are all absolute fundamental needs and things that you want to do to get the basics right. We said we would define a measure. Now, for me, because I'm clustering around the left-hand side, and interestingly, Tracy, you might be as well because of the example that you provided earlier, I'm going to bring on the measure, and I would think to myself and maybe with my team, what measure is it that both makes sense in terms of the purpose of the business, which is to help customers make best use of their leisure time? Which measure is it in the business that is going to be impacted and affected by the retention of staff? Now, in the scenario that I'm running here, that I've got in my mind, retention of staff leads to an inconsistent customer experience, which potentially means the traditional measure of the number of leads generated, because they're getting incoherent messaging, infrequent, and lack of consistency, might mean that my measure that I've positioned here in marketing might not be performing as well as it could. And it's interesting, I put that measure against the customer journey, and I think that's good. You may have a measure away from the customer journey that means something to the challenge, but is less clear to see how it relates to the customer journey, and that would lead to a conversation in itself. Is there anybody that's willing to kind of share that last connection with measure, just by saying what measure makes sense to them in the context of the challenge example that they're using? And we heard one from one earlier. Richard Copley, I'm interested in yours because you're always able to make that connection with measure. So I don't know whether you'd be willing to share.
Sure. So in terms of my challenge, I put it between management and operations. And in terms of team, I saw the problem, which, to recap, was about a system that they thought was working that turned out not to be working, as really being in either IT or in business change, in that sort of team. And the measure that I'm most interested in is the number of system-related errors and failures, and whether that number is increasing, which it feels like it ought to be, and what the cost of those failures is. And the third part of the measure is what the impact of those failures is on the customer's perception of the business. Because obviously that's something you want to know. If that's deteriorating, you want to know that earlier. And the problem is that when you get these sorts of system problems, sometimes you think about because you're too busy fixing what you think of the faces.
Yeah, no, I've got that, Richard. So just as you were talking there, without the time to kind of elaborate on what these things are called, we would end up with a kind of series of symbols. And what you did rather skillfully there is, whilst we haven't got time to go into what the different big picture symbols do, these four along the bottom, which are the measure one that we've seen, the technology, the money, and the process. You didn't mention process, so I didn't bring it on. But I think in the people, process, systems piece, you've got the connections, and what I've tried to do is provide the key elements to make those key connections. So I'm picking off as you're talking, how you're articulating, and it's very odd. It's like almost a positive feedback loop, which means that as you're talking, I'm relating, but I think you're then aligning with the symbols. And I see that all the time, which is when you present people with a reasonable framework, they start to align and adopt.
Yeah.
And we are going to time out. But go on.
The reason I didn't mention process is because I'm trying to convince this organisation that process is the answer.
Okay.
That's what I'm selling them.
That's interesting. And actually, I've pulled the share down now because we're going to time out. But if you notice on the big picture path, you've got the challenge turning into the opportunity. And because we've run out of time, it would be a flip. And the reason we do that is challenge attracts quite a lot of negative energy. I find as a brain bias, people are very happy to start talking about people. And also because that's what we like to talk about as humans, we then get on to challenges because that draws like black hat down energy, and then actually use that energy to flip it over. So even if you've got the most disillusioned, disenfranchised people in the organization, talking about people and challenges with all that richness of measures, tech, money and process, that adds to it. But really people get more animated about people and challenge. This dude behind me here, challenge, there. And then you flip that over. I call that a bit of a judo roll. So you like take that energy and flip it over into an opportunity. And we're going to time out, and using Chris's lovely reference in there, it has helped me with time, because what we can do is, instead of using SMART, which is the mnemonic that I would use to turn that challenge to opportunity to action, which may be best using that reference. And we are going to talk about this all day. If someone wants to come in and sweep up, that's fine. Has anyone got any closing comments just on that particular topic?
I really love Big Pick. It's a great tool, and one of the things, I didn't get one team that was affected because it was about a customer experiencing more complaints, and so the whole point of this was that I had to identify the possible areas or the possible teams that were affected by this, so that then I could actually start taking measures to then identify the actual team that was actually causing the problem. And so within manufacturing, for instance, you know, it could have been the design team, or it could have been manufacturing, but it could have also been the dispatch team, or it could even be the sales team who had falsely given people the wrong expectations of the product as well. So it was sort of like you couldn't identify straight away. But what's nice about the big picture is that you can put these symbols there to show and have a conversation with somebody with these other possible areas, and you could have a conversation with a stakeholder to say, what's your gut feeling? And then that's the first place then you start doing the measures, you know, because you can't ignore the fact that, you know, people have a gut feeling about perhaps where the problem might lie. So it was useful to be able to have all of these symbols out, not initially been able to identify straight away, but actually as a conversation piece with a stakeholder, it would be a good way to talk through with them, what's your gut feeling?
Yeah, and what I've noted from what you've said there, Chris, is a term that I use. It's to like varying degrees. It's a framework to work within, and the symbols will be used in varying degrees based on the conversation. And just by glancing them, and you use the term having them out on the table or available as a resource, people will naturally reach for them and come back, just like I saw you reaching down, some of you, to use the prop, just in the most simple of way. But if you're in a room like Chris Scott was in yesterday, full of resources on the table, once people overcome the simple understanding of what it means, they're willing to say, well, if that guy at the front's got a measure symbol that big, and I've got a measure symbol on a sticker in front of me, actually, maybe I can use that. And if I do use it, I'm going to get my message across more easily. And that's going to make me more effective in the long run, a compounding effect of being more productive, staying with the company for longer. And then you've got your return on investment for whichever business has brought it in and used it. So I need to close there as usual. There's so many conversations that could go up and down and left and right. I think we started at 3 past, so we're almost on there. I'd just like to thank you all for your time, and please watch out for every 2 weeks we run different themed webinars. I absolutely love the kind of conversations and things that go off in the back channel as well. It allows us to develop thoughts. It allows us to learn. It allows us to make like-minded connections. As Big Picture at Your Big Pick, I do sell kits, workshops and programs for people and business development. So do look them up. But at the centre of it, it's all about a good conversation. As we said earlier, it can change someone's life or work life in a blink of an eye just by making that connection. And if you can do that a few times over 10 minutes, half an hour, it's going to make the workplace a happier place, a more productive place. And if we've got a chance to help with that, then I think that's good use of our time. So thanks for joining. Have fantastic weekends, and I'd love to see you on a future webinar and have a chat with you. And take care. Look after yourselves. Bye.
Bye.
Cheers, man.
Bye.
Bye.